say without fear of contradiction that this quite possibly has the lowest carbon footprint of any bioeconomy event ever held in Ireland. And that's despite the fact that we have attendees from as far afield as the USA, Germany, Brazil, Italy, the European Commission, and indeed from all over Ireland. So on behalf of everybody involved in this Zoom webinar, I'd like to thank you all for attending. You're very welcome. We also have one of our guest speakers will be talking to us from Finland. And that's one of two presentations that will be taking place during the webinar. There will be an opportunity to ask questions after those presentations, and I'll let you know shortly how you can do that. But first, to formally launch Bioeconomy Week Ireland 2020, I'd like to ask the Minister of State in the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, with special responsibility for the bioeconomy, to say a few words. Minister Martin Heydon.
Thank you very much, Helen. Good morning, everybody, from near and far. It's a huge honour for me here today to remotely from my home welcome everybody and officially launch the event of Bioeconomy Ireland Week 2020. This is our annual event to raise awareness of the emerging area of the bioeconomy and to raise the awareness with you about what the bioeconomy is, how it is relevant to you, your sector, your business, the place where you live, your farm, and what's unique about it, how Ireland compares relative to other European countries, and how you can get involved. We will join with a range of our public partners from Teagasc, EPA, Údarás na Gaeltachta, Bordís Gavara, and private partners such as Ashley Environmental based in Waterford, Agricultural Consultants Association, as an example. And this is to run a series of events and online activities to help us to understand what is the bioeconomy and what is bio-based products. And most importantly, to give examples that we can see every day, because part of the work we have to do in raising awareness is to make farmers, industry, agri-food business and the consumer more aware of what the bioeconomy is, the huge opportunities it provides from a business perspective for balanced regional development, but also obviously the main driver being the sustainability piece and how it helps us have a much better environmental approach to all of our activities into the future. But the examples that we see every day, from the plastic bags that we can buy in our supermarkets that are increasingly paper-based or made from bio-based plastics. We saw in the last week here, one of our major indigenous banks launch a debit card that was 82% bio-based. And that was based on their customer feedback that they wanted to see a more sustainable approach. This shows the world is seeking out bio-based solutions, and the agri-food system should react to this opportunity in a sustainable and circular manner and for societal benefit, as well as their own. From the political perspective, currently the bioeconomy features in our programme for government, which is our plan for the next 5 years of this government. And it features in our actions to be addressed by my department to support innovation and sustainability for the agri-food sector, for our farmers, our foresters and our fishermen. It also features in actions to climate and environmentally improve our sector in relation to building knowledge, research and innovation and training, including for our farmers and their advisors to play a leading role in the development of a sustainable bioeconomy. As a newly appointed minister with responsibility for the bioeconomy on the agricultural side, I'm really excited about the opportunity that this provides our agricultural sector, balanced regional development, our agri-food businesses. And I look forward to helping to drive this initiative through both this week and the development of the forum and other great initiatives. And we will see, the opening up of people's minds to these ideas who aren't already aware of the huge potential the bioeconomy provides to us all. I'm sure you have noticed also in recent times that the bioeconomy is now fully integrated across the EU Green Deal, the Farm to Fork strategy in food, the biodiversity nature strategy, the circular economy waste strategy, the methane climate energy strategy, and chemicals industry strategies, all across Europe. This means that EU investment is going to be provided to our agri-food sector, our farmers and industry, and our rural communities to work with nature, to produce healthy and climate-friendly food, to build incomes based on waste streams, and to work with new industrial areas such as chemicals and plastics. Nationally, my department is working with other departments and agencies to take a coherent approach both on a policy and regulation basis. Our government has already made significant investments in the National Bioeconomy Research Centre, which is BiOrbic, funded by Science Foundation Ireland, and the National Bioeconomy Innovation Cluster, the Irish Bioeconomy Foundation, which is funded by Enterprise Ireland. We are working together to prepare Ireland to embrace the bioeconomy opportunities that lie before us. I'm also very happy today to announce that my department will also make a further €8 million investment in 3 bioeconomy related projects in the following areas: agriculture and the bioeconomy, examining bio-based fertilizer and bio-based pesticide options to address key challenges facing the tillage sector; forestry and the bioeconomy, examining bio-based chemicals and materials to future-proof our forestry sector and to diversify further the product and market opportunities; food and the bioeconomy, examining alternative protein approaches from niche, novel and cereal crops and grass from marine sources to complement our dairy and beef sectors. These projects will help Ireland to unlock new knowledge for bio-based products and lay the foundations for a knowledge-based agri-food sector on its pathway to carbon neutrality. I will also be announcing later this week a further investment with the Irish Research Council to support bioeconomy and food systems development. From 2021 onwards, my department will also support our farmers, scientists and industry to avail of the funding opportunities in the European Research and Innovation Partnership for a circular bio-based Europe and the EIB and the EU Commission-backed European Circular Bioeconomy Investment Fund. So in conclusion, I am aware today that we have an audience from the farming community, from research, from industry, and from other EU member states, and from the European Commission, and even more broadly away globally also. We wish to signal that the bioeconomy in Ireland is viewed as being part of the solution to our key current challenges for our economy, for our environment, for the climate, and for our own good health. This opportunity for our farmers and our agri-food sector, this is an opportunity for our farmers and our agri-food sector to build back better, and we will invest to build this future. We also wish for our international friends to know that Ireland is open for business, and we welcome your engagement and invite you to engage with us throughout both this week and into the future to explore all of the great opportunities that lie before us. So with that, I'd like to thank you and wish you an enjoyable and an information-rich week, and I'll hand back to Helen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now, to keep you all on your toes, we're going to run a few interactive polls throughout this webinar. And I think we have the first one ready for you. It's very simple. It really is yes or no answers. And if you can click it, and quite quickly, we'll be able to give you the responses that we received. It's really just to gauge how much knowledge there is out there about the bioeconomy. So the first question that we're going to ask you this morning is, can you name a bio-based product that you use in everyday life? We have 3 options. You can click on none, you can click on all, or you can click on one. It's bank card, a bio-based plastic bag from your local supermarket, or a bio-based milk carton. And if you were paying attention to the Minister's speech there was a clue. He actually gave one answer. We have no prizes for the best answers, but we would ask you to take part. Simple, tick the box. Can you name a bio-based product that you use in everyday life? Are there bank cards that are bio-based? Are there plastic bags from your local supermarket, or milk cartons? And the votes are flying in from all over the world. So can you name a bio-based product that you use in everyday life? Bank card, a plastic bag, or a bio-based milk carton? And I'm sure if we held this webinar this time next year, we would have an awful lot more options. So if you can keep clicking those boxes. Also, just to let you know, there will be an option to ask questions, as I mentioned, to the panelists after the presentations. At the bottom of your screen, if you can look, there's a Q&A icon along the bottom of your screen. If you click on that question and answer icon and type in your question, there is a team behind the scenes compiling all of the questions, and we will, where possible, give as many of them to the panelists. So at any stage during the presentation, if a question springs to mind, click on the Q&A icon on the bottom of the screen and type in your question. And we have a result. So can you name a bio-based product? 25% of participants said a bank card, and they were correct. The Minister did mention the newly launched bank card by Bank of Ireland in his speech. A very impressive 77% of you said a bio-based plastic bag from your local supermarket, and 38% said a bio-based milk carton. That milk carton was just recently launched by Lee Strand's Kerry-based dairy processors, and it's a carbon-neutral packaging made from paperboard, which comes from certified forests. And of course, we're all familiar at this stage with the bio-based plastic bags. So there you go. That's the first of our interactive polls. We will have a few more during it. And we're going to go to the next presentation. Again, the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If any question springs to mind during the presentations, please type it in. You can do so identifying yourself, or you can do it anonymously. It's entirely up to you. Our next presentation now, all the way from Finland, is Marc Pallahi, who's director of the European Forest Institute. This is a leading scientific intergovernmental organization working on forests and the bioeconomy. And just recently, they published a 10-point action plan to create a circular bioeconomy of well-being. This will be implemented through the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance that was established by the Prince of Wales. So ladies and gentlemen, Marc Pallahi.
Thank you, Helen. Dear Minister, dear colleagues, good morning. Thank you for inviting me to this very important event. It's always great to be connected to Ireland. And Minister, congratulations for taking the lead in explaining how the bioeconomy can address the root causes of the multidimensional crisis that we are facing currently. Because the COVID pandemic that we are facing is just the tip of the iceberg of a much larger crisis. But as Winston Churchill used to say, never waste a good crisis. And I think this is especially true nowadays when, for obvious reasons, the COVID pandemic has had very negative impacts, but at the same time, it has provided us with an opportunity to pause, reflect, and reimagine our world so that in the future, our economy can prosper in harmony with nature and not against it. This is crucial because the current health, climate, and biodiversity crises are just the same crisis. They are different phases of the same fundamental problem, our economic system. A system that is addicted to fossil resources and to growth at all costs. A system that has failed to value and incorporate our most important capital and the basis for human health and well-being, nature. In fact, scientists for many years have alerted us that the loss of biodiversity and the degradation of our natural ecosystems are key factors explaining the emergence and transmission to humans of zoonotic diseases such as COVID-19. But also scientists have alerted us for many, many years about the negative impacts of climate change to human health. So I think we can draw very clear parallels between the health of our planet, our own health. And having arrived at such tipping point marked by this unprecedented pandemic, we clearly need a new way of looking at our world, a new way of looking at our planet, a new narrative for the future generations, and especially a new economic paradigm. A new economic paradigm where life, remember that bio means life, where life becomes its true engine and its true purpose. A new economic paradigm that places people and nature at its center. This is what many of us call the circular bioeconomy. But let me highlight why the circular bioeconomy is so important as a catalyst to reimagine our world. And let me highlight that the circular bioeconomy relies on healthy and resilient ecosystems, relies on the sustainable management of our biological systems as basis to produce food, renewable energy, renewable materials, and key ecosystem services to create sustainable well-being and support human health, all that in harmony with nature. So I believe that the circular bioeconomy provides us with a conceptual framework to holistically transform our land, food, and health systems, to holistically rethink our industrial sectors, our cities, and our rural areas, so that we can address in an integrated manner challenges like biodiversity conservation, climate change, prosperity, equality, urbanization. So in a way, I would say that the circular bioeconomy offers us with the possibility to address some of the greatest dichotomies that have characterized the industrial era. The dichotomy between ecology and economy, the dichotomy between rural and urban areas. But let me give you 3 brief examples on the key transformational potential of the circular bioeconomy. First of all, and even if it looks paradoxical, the bioeconomy is probably the best strategy to restore biodiversity, to protect biodiversity. This is because the bioeconomy is ultimately powered by biodiversity. Biodiversity determines the capacity of our biological systems to adapt and evolve in a changing environment. So biodiversity is a precondition for a long-term, sustainable and resilient bioeconomy. Biodiversity should be the priority investment for a long-term bioeconomy. But this at the same time offers the possibility for the bioeconomy to place biodiversity at the center of the economic agenda. So a long-term, profitable and predictable bioeconomy framework with the right incentives can attract the necessary investments and commitments to protect biodiversity by forest owners, farmers, companies, and industries. Because at the end of the day, biodiversity is the true engine of their business. Second example, the bioeconomy is crucial to support inclusive prosperity. It's crucial for a socially fair transition. And this is paradoxically related to one of the disadvantages of the bioeconomy compared to a fossil economy. That disadvantage is the fact that managing, mobilizing, processing biological resources tends to be more costly and more complex when compared to fossil resources. This is because of the nature of biological resources, the distribution and its ownership. But this theoretical disadvantage at the same time is one of the strengths of the bioeconomy because it allows us to distribute jobs, innovation, prosperity in wider part of the territory, especially in rural areas. Just look at the example of the European forest-based sector. Forests occupy 40% of our territory in Europe. And the forest-based sector provides more than 3 million jobs. These are many more than the 3 energy-intensive industries, steel, cement, and chemicals, all together. In addition, the European forest sector includes 400,000 small and medium enterprises and 16 million forest owners, which are at the same time, many of them farmers. This is an incredible socio-ecological fabric, socio-ecological infrastructure to realize the ambitions of the Green Deal. Basically, said in another way, there is no Green Deal without unlocking the potential of such important socio-ecological fabric. So it is important to highlight that a bioeconomy is one of the most strategic ways we have to attract investments, innovation, jobs to rural areas, so that they can exercise its full potential in addressing many of our societal challenges, climate change, biodiversity conservation, etc. And the third important example is related to climate change. In order to move towards a climate neutral economy, it is not only necessary to move towards fossil-free energy, we also need to move to fossil-free materials. As the minister was mentioning, we will need to replace materials like steel, concrete, or plastics if we want a climate neutral economy. And to do that, there is only one alternative: the sustainable use and transformation of our biological resources into bio-based solutions. And the good news is that with emerging science and technology, we can now transform biological resources such as wood, remember the most versatile material on Earth, into a totally new range of innovative bio-based solutions that can replace and environmentally outperform fossil products from industrial sectors such as construction, textiles, transport, chemicals, packaging. For instance, we can now produce a new and revolutionary material called nanocellulose, which is 5 times stronger than steel, but 5 times lighter. The first car made of nanocellulose was unveiled last year in Japan. But we can also produce wood-based textiles with a carbon footprint 5 times lower than polyester And in addition, not generating the problem of microplastics as a result of polyester. And as you probably know, we can also produce a new generation of wood engineering products to revolutionize the building construction sector. And using wood in construction is one of the most effective ways we have to reduce the carbon footprint in our cities. Because using wood does not only mean reducing substantially the emissions compared to using concrete or steel, but it means de facto creating a carbon capture technology in our cities. Because for every cubic meter of wood engineering products that we use, we are storing 1 ton of CO2. In addition, using wood allows us for the implementation of industrial prefabrication methods, circular systems that reduce the total amount of material used in construction by 50%. But as you can see, the bioeconomy is already a technological reality. Now the challenge is to make it become an economic reality, a reality that places people and nature at its center. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marc. Thank you very much, Marc. I think Marc will be staying with us from his office in Finland for a Q&A panel at the end. But before we go on to our next speaker, I think it's time for our second interactive poll. And it's an easy one this time, particularly after listening to Marc's speech. The second question for our interactive poll, which should pop up on your screen now, there it is bioeconomy can play a role in Ireland's recovery post-COVID and provide new high-value jobs? A simple yes or no answer. Again, listening to Marc's speech, I think it's probably an easy one to answer. Bioeconomy can play a role in Ireland's recovery post-COVID and provide new high-value jobs. You can tick yes or you can tick no. And to remind you, if any questions did spring to mind during Marc's presentation, there is an option to ask a question. The Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen, just click on that, type in your question, and we do have a team behind the scenes compiling all of the questions. And if we get the opportunity, I'll put those questions to Marc during the Q&A after our second presentation. So I think you're all voting again. I think the last few seconds countdown, click yes or click no. Can bioeconomy help with a post-COVID recovery? Yes or no? And I think we almost have an answer. And I'd imagine, pretty overwhelming, folks. 100% of you agreed that bioeconomy can play a role in Ireland's recovery post-COVID and provide new high-value jobs. Something to be very optimistic about. There's not much to be optimistic about at the moment, so it's great to see such an overwhelming response, and particularly to hear a positive presentation like Marc's. I think it's time to move on to the second presentation of the morning. We're now joined by Kevin O'Connor, and Kevin is Director of BiOrbic, Bioeconomy SFI Research Centre. Now, this is Ireland's only national economic research centre. Kevin will talk us through some of the exciting developments through scientific, technological and flagship developments. So a lot of the work that's going on behind the scenes that none of us are aware of, Kevin is at the coalface of that and he'll fill us in. Kevin O'Connor.
Thanks very much, Helen, and good morning, Minister, good morning, Marc, and everybody at this Bioeconomy Ireland Week launch event. So, as Helen has said, BiOrbic is Ireland's National Bioeconomy Research Centre. We're funded by Science Foundation Ireland. We bring together Ireland's leading universities and research performing organisations like Teagasc to address research and innovation challenges in the bioeconomy. So our ambition is to be the global leader in the bioeconomy research, supporting Ireland in a just transition to a sustainable society. And we try to achieve this through our research excellence, innovation, the development of future bioeconomy leaders by training our PhD and postdoc researchers in training programs. And we want those people to go out into the workforce for the benefit of Ireland, the benefit of Europe and beyond. So our philosophy is very much about collaboration and inclusion. And Marc referred to that in his own speech about if you really want an inclusive society, you have to bring all of the stakeholders together and include them and in a meaningful way. And so while we started off with a small cohort of research performing organizations and a small group of industry collaborators, we've actually expanded to work with other partners, and that includes primary producers, farmers, institutes of technology have come on board because they have a lot to offer, but we're also working very closely with policymakers and again, expanding our industry partners. And we'll continue to grow those collaborations nationally and internationally. So our research program focuses on separation of complex mixtures. It's a bit like the oil industry. The oil industry needs to separate out complex mixtures. Well, the bioeconomy also has to do this. You know, we have grass, we have wood, we have complex mixtures of sugars that might come from food processing. And we want to then convert those bio-based resources into products of value. That is plastics, that is chemicals, but also things that are of benefit to our health and to animal health. So these technological goals are actually underpinned by our sustainability research. So we have a very important pillar in our research center called sustainability. And that's about understanding the bioeconomy. It's about working with citizens, consumers, businesses, producers, policymakers, and understanding what possible bioeconomy futures could Ireland have. So you might see different bioeconomies emerge within Ireland. That can be coastal, that can be rural, that can even be urban bioeconomies. So who are the stakeholders in that bioeconomy and how can their voices be heard? So sustainability is at the heart of the bioeconomy strategy at EU level, and it's also at the heart of the Irish bioeconomy strategy. So resource efficiency, greenhouse gas emissions reduction, increasing biodiversity, ecosystem services, they're all areas that can contribute not only to Ireland's climate actions, but also to our economic prosperity. And again, Marc and the Minister referred to that. So to that end, BiOrbic is working with farmers, and we want at farm level to enhance biodiversity, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and co-create new business opportunities for farmers within the bioeconomy. So this enhancement of biodiversity, these nature-based systems, they can provide resilience, but they also provide economic opportunity. So we're working with partners to build an ecosystem that goes from fundamental research through to pilot scale activities and to all the way to the market, in collaboration with, for example, the Irish Bioeconomy Foundation, which is based at the National Bioeconomy Campus in Lisheen in County Tipperary. We are collaborating with agri-food companies on the building of biorefineries, with farms to have net zero emissions, marine companies seeking to develop fish and algal biorefineries. So our objective is to provide excellence in research that will help these industries, that will speed up the development of these technologies into the market, and to help industry to de-risk and validate technologies at commercially relevant scales, thus offering them market opportunities, credibility with investors, and new processes and products that they can actually patent. So at BiOrbic, we really truly believe that the bioeconomy is central to the future economic development in Ireland. It's already a current major contributor to Ireland's economy through food production and agriculture and the marine, through forestry. But these sectors have huge potential for further growth and can contribute to economic development in rural and coastal areas. So the bioeconomy can help Ireland not only to address the programme for government, international commitments such as the Paris Agreement, but also the prosperity and resilience of our communities. So we need to be imaginative, we need to be creative on how Ireland develops its bioeconomy. It's not simply about replacing fossil with bio-based, that is part of it, but we also need to understand that the bio-based can give us things that fossil could never give us. So it's a new way of doing things. It's to look at traditional sectors and we say they can prosper, we can empower them, sectors like agriculture, forestry and marine, that they can become the stewards of sustainability and tap into a growing climate neutral market. There are multiple customers that are emerging globally that want greener products, that want products that are carbon neutral, that are climate neutral. And so the bioeconomy needs not only technological solutions, but also nature-based solutions. And they are a central pillar in its development, where economic growth is actually coupled to climate action. Now, this is a huge challenge, and that requires a coordinated approach, not only to research, but also to innovation. And we also need, of course, significant investment in order for Ireland to achieve its true potential. But it really has this huge potential in the bioeconomy. So I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very fruitful Bioeconomy Ireland week. Back over to you, Helen.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I think before we move on to our Q&A, we have another poll question for you. So it's going to pop up on the screen, same as last time, a simple yes or no answer. And the question we're asking you this time is Ireland's bioeconomy needs to work with farmers, foresters, fisheries and industry and be informed by scientific, technological and engineering developments. Again, a simple yes or no answer. Click on yes or click on no. The question this time, that Ireland's bioeconomy needs to work with all the stakeholders, farmers, foresters, fisheries and industry, and be informed by scientific, technological and engineering developments. We've had a huge number of you reply. The answers keep flying in. So if you can tick yes or no. Again, what we're really trying to do with these is gauge how much knowledge there is out there in Ireland's bioeconomy, because the attendees come from all walks of life. So yes or no. And also to remind you, as the Q&A panel is going on, we would like to get you very involved in today's event. So if any questions come to mind, click on Q&A, identify yourself or not, it's entirely up to you. But if you would like to pose a question to Marc, Kevin, or the Minister, if you type in your question, we will do our utmost to get those questions to the Minister. So I think we just have a few seconds more. Ireland's bioeconomy needs to engage with all stakeholders, and we'll see what kind of answer we got. Again, I think all of the attendees are taking part in the poll, which is great. And we would like you all to take part in our panel discussion. It's a new experience for all of us. Normally it's a question of raising your hand to ask a question. This morning, we're asking you to click on the button. And there we have it. Again, an overwhelming 100% of attendees agree with this, that Ireland's bioeconomy needs to work with farmers, foresters, fisheries and industry, and be informed by scientific, technological and engineering developments. 100% agreement with that. So thank you very much for taking part. Again, we would like you to stay involved. We would like you to pose any questions you have for our panelists. We're joined now by both of our speakers, Kevin O'Connor and Marc Pallahi, and we're also joined by Minister Heydon. And as questions come in, I think what I'd like to do initially, and it's something that Marc particularly touched on with his presentation, living through COVID, I suppose it's making everybody reimagine the way we're living, and priorities are changing. There's a huge emphasis on rethinking the way we live, rethinking the way we eat, rethinking where we live, and rethinking our health system. So really the bioeconomy is poised to tap into that change of priorities that's really happening internationally, isn't it? Would any of our panelists like to address that? Kevin, you've popped up on screen. You're there first.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think, the theme of this week is building back better. We do have to rethink how we do things, and it will provide people with opportunities. So I think people are understanding that we are very fragile. As a society, as a globe, we are incredibly fragile. Marc has referred to it. If we build resilience, if we work closer with nature, if we empower farmers, foresters and mariners with the skills and policy that supports business development, then we absolutely can change. It can accelerate our movement away from dependency on fossil. It can accelerate our unison with nature, moving back to nature. So I think the opportunities are enormous.
Also then, Marc, could we say that in a way, if we invest more in our bioeconomy, and if there's more worldwide buy-in in the need to develop bioeconomy, we could in some way mitigate against something like COVID happening again or having a severe an impact again in the future? Would that be correct, Marc?
I think so, because at the end of the day, if you go to the roots of the word bioeconomy, as I mentioned before, bio means life. So it's at the end of the day to really develop an economy that is rooted in life, in the understanding of life in its broadest sense. So it needs to be based on the good understanding of nature. And as I have mentioned before, it has been clear for a decade or so that the impact that we are having in nature is coming back to us in the form of viruses, for example. So I think one of the characteristics of the industrial era is the profound disconnection that we have created between humanity and nature. And we have conducted some research during the confinement, and you could see that one of the big changes in the cities have been the number of visits to urban forests have multiplied by 5-6 times. So I think this pandemic has made us realize of many important things. First of all, the importance of nature. And I am also collaborating with many architects which are trying also to start redefining the future of cities so that they become more self-sufficient, more connected to nature. So the designing cities not as opposed to nature, but as being part of nature. So I think probably this has been is having a catalytic effect, the COVID-19, at many different scales. So we might hopefully, because we need that, we might experience in the next years a big transformational change in how we relate to nature, and understanding that at the end of the day, our natural capital is the basis, not only for our economy, but for our own health. And without health, there is no economy either.
Okay, thank you, Marc. Minister, Kevin in his presentation spoke of the fact that a bioeconomy, a thriving bioeconomy, will empower farmers. Would it be fair to say, I suppose, if farmers increase farming, how they farm and farming sustainably, that in some way it will help secure their future, it will empower them, and it will give them more reason to be optimistic heading into the future?
There's no doubt of that, Helen. And I think what you find with many Irish farmers right now is they're looking at their activity, they're looking at their income, and they realize they are more busy, working harder in more difficult circumstances than the previous generation for maybe less income, because of a wider issue of a cheap food environment that we're in worldwide, and maybe there isn't enough value based on the production of food, or there isn't enough value based on what it is they do. And I think farmers are starting to open up their minds to see there's ways we can work smarter, and that maybe it's not just about scale, but it's about making sure we use all of the nature offers us. And farmers are, as custodians of land, are more open to that than most. But the thing about the bioeconomy is we're talking about all of the different waste products that are currently considered waste products that in the future will be seen to have great value, and that value will add an income, and that the circular element of using every aspect of a product and not leaving anything behind. Similarly, I think the same analogy can be made to the circular nature of rural economies, because this will move away from, we've seen it not just in Ireland, but in all countries. Marc touched on the focus on cities and making those more sustainable. We've seen such a drive of populations and of economic activity into our cities to the disadvantage of rural areas. This is about the economic empowerment of our rural communities and about getting that balance much better. So I think everybody's a winner. This is so circular on more than just the environmental side, it's circular on the economic side as well.
And staying on that theme, Minister, we do have a question from one of our attendees. What can we do to ensure that small or medium groups of farmers or forest owners can get involved in the bioeconomy supply chain? So if any of our panelists would like to address that, but I suppose to ensure their involvement, to reach out, to connect to them and to empower them to take part, what can be done?
Kevin has his hand up there. If he wants to come in first, I can.
Yeah, sure. I think there's a lot can be done. I think I've talked to a lot of farmers, and they say this, like, I'm a small farmer, I'm very busy, as the Minister has indicated, working extremely long hours under a lot of economic pressure. What can I do? I'm just one farmer. And so what we think is really critical is, for example, we have a project with Carberry in West Cork on a demonstrator farm, trying to change practices so that we can actually show farmers in the area and nationally what you can do to actually make changes. And also, really importantly, that this is economically worth their while. It's one thing to say, you must become greener, there are environmental pressures, but you also have to turn it into an opportunity. So for small farmers, for small foresters, it's about demonstration. I think that's really key. Having things on the ground where they can see. If you cannot see it, you can't emulate it. So I think this is really important. And we see from our own research that there is a premium that will be paid for green products. And I'm not talking necessarily about plastics, for example, which are very low cost or very cheap. We're talking about food products, for example, into the food market where you can actually produce climate neutral, carbon neutral products. You will get a premium. The market research is coming back and telling us that. So there are opportunities for small farmers and for foresters to get into green products and also certification. And I know there was a question on what are the barriers to implementation. I think part of that is economic. How do you incentivize people to have renewable energy on their farms? How do you incentivize them to increase biodiversity? You need to incentivize that by paying them to do this, but also the market incentivizing it by saying, we'll buy carbon credits. We will reward you for climate neutral products. So there's a lot of things that can help farmers, but policy and economic incentives are absolutely key. Do we want to be paying hundreds of millions of euros of fines to the European Commission, or do we want to be paying hundreds of millions of euros of investment into changes in practices? I think it's a no-brainer.
Thanks, Kevin. Mark, that's something that Kevin mentioned in his answer, that another question has come in asking about the single biggest hurdle that is slowing down the development of the bioeconomy across Europe. Incentivizing it is one thing that Kevin mentioned. From your point of view, what's the biggest hurdle and what can we do to overcome that hurdle, Mark?
I think, and first let me add to the previous question that one way also to address the fragmentation of forest owners, farmers, would be also by establishing cooperatives. You know, there is a very good example here in Finland. One of the most advanced companies in terms of forest bioeconomy is called Metsä Group. It's a cooperative made out of 100,000 forest owners. You know, and I think this is something that could be stimulated in the future. I think regarding the bottlenecks for unlocking the potential of the bioeconomy, I would say, I would turn the question around and say that we need bold, ambitious actions around 4 axes, 4 I's. Innovation, because there is a lot of technology available, but the challenge is to transform this technology into business. So, and this is what is an innovation about. Investments, public funding will not be enough to catalyze the greatest economic transformation in human history. So we need massive investments here. Infrastructures at all levels, education, research, but also infrastructures, green infrastructures, more forest, and infrastructures to replace, for example, things like oil refineries into biorefineries. So this also will take a lot of time and requires investments. And finally, institutions, policies. We need policies at many different levels. For example, something so simple like public procurement policies. This already represents 20% of the GDP at the EU level. Public procurement, for example, in cities to incentivize wood construction instead of concrete and steel. You know, this could be really powerful in the future. So sometimes it's not only about putting more money, but through public procurement, we could really have a lot of effects. But these 4 I's, I think they are a good synthesis of the 4 axes for which we need actions.
Minister, Mark mentioned there that we're talking about the greatest economic transformation in human history and how vitally important it is to have the right policies. Are the government in Ireland aware enough of that, of the urgent need to implement and to bring in policies that can advance the development of the bioeconomy in Ireland? Is it something that's on your radar?
Absolutely, and our programme for government reflects that. When this government was formed only this summer, our programme for government, which is the plan that sets out all the ambitions we hope to achieve over the next 5 years of our term, the bioeconomy is very central to that. And what we've recognised is that this needs to be a whole of government approach, that it's not just a matter for farmers in agriculture or the agri-food businesses, or for those in the climate action side of government. So what we are doing is developing a really coordinated approach across government and agencies to develop and deal with key matters on policy regulation, building a network and a forum that's going to be a really key element to this, is to feed that in. Because what we want to ensure, and what I'll be ensuring as a minister in this government, is that when any state department is developing a policy, that they're looking to see where the bioeconomy can fit into this. This shouldn't be just one minister's job, one agency's job, one department's job. It has to infiltrate itself into every part of every day in how we look at new opportunities, because we have to look at things completely differently. We're asking farmers to do that, we're asking the agri-food sector to do that, and we as policymakers obviously have to do that.
There's another question possibly coming on from that, which is in some way reflects how important it is to get the general public to buy into the concept as well. And it's a question, how can we ensure biodiversity and the environment remain the priority? And what role do certification bodies and the general public have to play as a safety net? Is that something any of our panelists would like to address? I suppose the need for both public buy-in and the need for proper certification bodies to get on board to speed it up. Kevin, is that something you'd like to come in on?
Sure, yeah, and I think it's absolutely critical. And I think again, you know, it's around the business opportunity as much as it is about the environmental opportunity. So you see large brands, big brands globally, like Nestle. If you go onto their websites, if you look at their 5-year plans, they talk about being climate neutral, and they talk about enhancing biodiversity. That is going to drive supplier behavior. That is being driven by public behavior. Yeah, the demand from consumers that I do not want to be consuming products that are damaging the environment. And I want to go beyond carbon neutrality. I want to ensure that it is impacting positively on biodiversity. And the big brands are responding to that. That causes a trickle-down effect, and it is putting pressure on farmers, but it also provides an opportunity for farmers. So I think if you have government policies that are protecting biodiversity, pushing for the enhancement of biodiversity, it will become the norm. It will actually become a central pillar of business development. And I referred to that in my opening remarks about the fact that we have to link economic growth with climate action. Biodiversity is part of climate action. So I think it's a huge opportunity. So the general public will play a role through being citizens and putting pressure on their local representatives, putting pressure on government, but also as consumers, putting pressure on the food companies that provide them with the food.
Marc, is that something you'd like to come in on?
Yes, I think this is crucial, and I think we need also here a paradigmatic shift in the way policies have been put forward in the past. Many times, always conservation has been opposed to production. Ministry of Environment is acting as a police for the Ministry of Agriculture. And I think in the future, as the minister was highlighting, we need a synergistic approach. Ministries working together, because at the end of the day, we are all in the same boat. So linking, for example, bioeconomy investments with biodiversity investments, because they are the two sides of the same coin. Developing new business models to internalize biodiversity into the market, for example, through payments for ecosystem services, or reverse auctions, where, for example, the ministry could put several millions of euros for biodiversity conservation, but ask the farmers and the forest owners to come back with proposals, like in a bid, and then identify which are the winning proposals. So to provide these incentives for voluntary action. And again, going back to my example of this cooperative that I mentioned in Finland, that is a good case also because having a cooperative, you have enough critical mass at the land level to be able to certify for biodiversity considerations, for example, using FSC. So this, this cooperative approach is also important for the bioeconomy, but also to ensure that you can address biodiversity issues at the landscape level.
There's an awful lot of questions coming in. I'm just going to quickly stick with you, Marc, for 1 second, because somebody mentions an example from Finland. How important will public and private partnerships be in developing the forest and agri-food bioeconomy in Ireland, which is something you were mentioning? There's a great example of this in Finland in the Expand Fibre Innovation Ecosystem. Is this something that you think we could be implemented in Ireland? And is this something that our other panelists think we could implement in Ireland? Marc, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, in Finland, for me, the best example of how to invest in biodiversity is the program called Metsä program. It was, as I mentioned, it was an auction approach, so a reverse auction approach, where the government for specific regions where biodiversity is a priority was saying, okay, we are ready to invest so many millions of euros on biodiversity considerations. Please make us proposals. And the forest owners were preparing proposals on how they would be addressing biodiversity considerations, and also the investments needs to do that. And I think that was a very intelligent way of how to mobilize and make the forest owners committed to the issue in an intelligent way. But public-private partnerships are also crucial in the future. And we have the good example of the bio-based industries joint undertaking at the European level, which is one of the best public-private partnerships in the world on the bioeconomy.
Kevin, you have your hand up. You have something to say on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to say that I agree, Marc, the bio-based industries joint undertaking in Europe. I'm on the scientific committee for that. I think it's a fantastic example of where European Commission and industry have come together. And John Bell is director of Healthy Planet in the European Commission. That was his brainchild. John's Irish. So, we have some of the best thinkers in the world. And I think Ireland is absolutely poised to do this. So we have cooperatives in Ireland. Marc has mentioned cooperatives. We have really strong cooperatives. We work with dairy cooperatives, we work with mushroom cooperatives. So we're actually in a very strong position to get that critical mass. I think a public-private partnership in Ireland should be actually an ambition of government. I think it really is something that we could do very, very well. And because it brings the private and public sector together and say, how are we going to coordinate industrial activity? How do we protect biodiversity? How do we enhance rural and coastal communities? The opportunity is enormous, and you'll get much better bang for your buck. Yeah.
So, Minister, is that something, as Kevin said, public-private partnership, one of the ambitions of the government? Can we work on that to get more bang for our buck, as he says?
Absolutely. Again, back to our programme for government, another key focus of that on the agriculture side is our support in the development of more producer organisations. And also when you look at the role that the cooperative movement play in Ireland, they are very strong, as Kevin has outlined. And, you know, the way this will be a success is, you know, for this to work, it is ultimately dependent on the buy-in of the primary producer and the agri-food businesses. And for that, to get that, it needs to be worked there a while. But I think the key to make sure that we do get that sustainable income into those rural communities and into those primary producers is to make sure they're involved from the very start. Involvement early. But if you look at the example that Kevin gave about the small project in West Cork, where, you know, my department has funded through an EIP Agri Funds a demonstration, a small scale biorefinery on the farm in West Cork. What primarily was done in that area previously was grass was grown to feed dairy cattle. The biorefinery approach sees about 4 different products coming out of that one activity now with 4 different values. So it converts the freshly harvested grass into a range of products. That is, one is an optimized cattle feed fiber, that's a silage bale, that actually has benefits in terms of the nitrogen and carbon output of the cows afterwards. There's a non-GMO protein concentrate feed for monogastrics. There's a high value sugar stream that's now been analysed as to the role that can play in the food chain, and a grass way for fertilizer or bioenergy applications. And again, moving towards decarbonising farming through reduction of fossil-based energy products. So if there's 4 different uses for the same product that the farmer was getting paid for once through producing dairy products, you now can see the added value is there. And we just have to make sure that the farmer and the primary producer is an integral part of that from the word go, and that they get to share of that.
We're running out of time a little bit now. One comment that was made, and obviously all the panelists would I'd imagine agree with this, that independent certification must be based on sound scientific data. And I can see a lot of nodding heads, so everybody agrees with that. One thing we haven't touched on yet to the panel is education. And I would imagine we need to upskill people to be qualified to work in jobs that don't even exist yet, jobs that we haven't even imagined. How early should we start targeting students around the world? I mean, is primary school too young an age to start introducing in the curriculum subjects or ideas that might help upskill a future generation of workers for the bioeconomy? Would any of our panelists like to touch on that, Kevin, please?
Yeah, so working with the Department of Agriculture, it's already in the curriculum, yeah? So we've identified that going into primary schools and secondary schools and talking about the bioeconomy, it's actually in the plan for government to implement it in the educational program. So the government, to be fair, have already started that. But also we've started, for example, a master's, a postgraduate diploma as well in the bioeconomy and business with IT Tralee and UCD combining. So this is an example of where we're using our skills, access to network to actually promote education. And again, at PhD level and postdoc level, we are training, but a lot more has to be done. Yeah, we really need to expand it. And I agree with you, much more in the primary sector, primary education, secondary education, and also at 3rd level.
Marc, from your point of view, education, what more could we be doing to make sure we have the skilled workers when we need them?
A lot, and especially you touch one of my favorite topics, which is primary education. I think this is one of the greatest challenges of our century, to rethink education, because you know, now it's very fashionable to talk about digitalization in schools, sophisticated tools, and we are forgetting that at the end of the day, nature is the ultimate sophistication, and we need to bring back children to nature. You know, it's not only about educating people and children on the bioeconomy, it's to bring kids to forests so that they can touch and see the dynamics, the rhythms of nature, how the seasons are changing, connect children with natural materials like wood. So I think here we need a fundamental systemic change of how education is, because at the end of the day, they will be the future, and the bioeconomy will not succeed unless children now internalize this in the broadest sense. And of course, as Kevin mentioned, also we need to rethink, for example, how business schools are operating. I think business schools should be totally rethought in the future, so that they incorporate the importance of natural capital, bioeconomy, ecology and economy being also the two sides of the same coin. So this is a fundamental issue for the future.
That's great. And I think you're right, actually, about young children, Mark. We all know the power of pester power. And sometimes the best way to change an adult's behavior is by a child coming home and nagging them into changing their behavior. So I think if we get them at a young age, it can have a huge impact on the behavior of everybody in a household. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. We have an hour for the event. So before we leave you, we've got one final poll question that we would like to push to all of our attendees. The final question, and I would hope after listening to our presentations and after listening to the answers that were given and the questions that were posed, in some way I can imagine the answer we'll get to this, but do you now have sufficient understanding and knowledge of the bioeconomy to get involved? Do you feel, or do you feel more enthused about it? Is it something that you'd be more excited about getting involved in? So possibly after today's event, but in general, do you have sufficient understanding and knowledge of the bioeconomy to get involved? And to listen, as we were saying, even young children, hopefully, as we said, get them out, get their hands dirty, get out into nature. I think everybody can get involved in the bioeconomy, but you yourself as an attendee, yes or no, do you have sufficient understanding and knowledge of the bioeconomy to get involved? Yes or no? I would also like to point out when you're answering this question that so many questions came in from attendees. We didn't have an opportunity to pose them all to our panelists, but all of the questions will be compiled. The team behind the scenes will go through them, and we will endeavour within a week to get answers to you. If we can't answer your specific question, then we will definitely cover the theme that the question would fit into. So we will, if your question wasn't posed, you will get an answer at some stage within the next week. The team behind the scenes will do that. And I think that's quite encouraging, actually, the answer we have had to the last question. Do you have sufficient understanding and knowledge of the bioeconomy to get involved? 82% of those who responded said they did, and 18% said they didn't. And I would hope after today's event, maybe that 18% when they go away might change their mind, because I think everybody can get involved in the bioeconomy, but 82%, very encouraging. I'm sure all of our panelists will agree that it is encouraging. And after today's event, I hope those of you who are more interested can go on, maybe change behavior slightly and do a little bit of research yourself. But I think everybody is a stakeholder in the bioeconomy. It's not just food producers, industry, farmers, scientists, researchers. We're all stakeholders, and it is all, I suppose, in our interests to get involved. But I would like to thank all of our panelists for taking part in today's Zoom webinar. Kevin O'Connor, Minister Martin Heydon, and Marc Pallahi, thank you all very much for your time. And I would like to thank all of the attendees for taking part, for getting involved with it. And before we finish up, I would like to hand back over to Minister Martin Heydon. Minister, don't make the mistake I made and press your unmute button so people can hear you. Apologies for the boop at the beginning of the event, but I'd like to thank you all for your participation and hand you over to Minister Martin Heydon to close the event.
Thanks very much, Helen. And look, I think this has been a really great engagement this morning. Particular thanks also to yourself, but to Kevin and to Marc for really good, insightful engagement. And I hope everybody viewing here has enjoyed that. And while I'm bringing this element to a close, it is only the beginning of a very exciting week of an awful lot of activity. And I look forward to engaging with that over the course of the week, and to also making another couple of announcements regarding research and funding and all the rest. This is and the awareness that it's raising is so important to address many of the issues that people have raised here about how we can make this real, how we can bring this connection to farmers, to the general public, to industry, to small agri-food businesses, and to make rural economies understand how they can develop from this. And Helen, you yourself mentioned about the jobs we don't even know that are going to exist in the future. It is so exciting. A lot of people don't like change, and change is a challenge, and we have to manage change. But from a policy perspective, we're up for that challenge here in Ireland. We really want to dive in and realise all of the opportunities that the bioeconomy provides for us, for our environment and for our economy and for our people. So we look forward to engaging with you again into the future. Thanks very much for your, joining us here this morning, and we'll talk to you soon again. Thank you. Slán.
Bye-bye. Thank you.